righty. I think we're going to get started. I know that the Senate and the House had different schedules today. I did not want to keep the senators waiting because I know their time is precious as well. So we're gonna get started. And just to give everybody some background on where we are, the reason we're having this meeting today was this past summer there was some discussion about the MARTOC funds and how they were spent. And so the City of Atlanta conducted an audit by the firm Malden and Jenkins, and they found that MARTA did owe the City of Atlanta some money. And so I really called for an additional set of eyes, a professional set of eyes, just to look at this problem and go through this. And so MARTA called on KPMG to conduct that second audit, which technically the auditors tell me is not an audit, it's an assessment. So we'll let them explain that to us. But they did this second assessment to see if there were discrepancies. So with that, I will turn it over to the CEO, Collie Greenwood. And is your mic not on?
Nope.
Oh, there we go. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, members of the MARTOC Committee. My name is Collie Greenwood, General Manager and CEO of MARTA. Joining me today are some board members. Ms. Jones, Ms. Hardage, Ms. Pollock, and Mr. Frierson are in the room, as well as a number of other supporters. I really wanted to take off from where Chair Silcox mentioned that in December of 2024, MARTA did retain the global accounting and advisory firm KPMG at the request of MARTOC, and we asked them to perform an in-depth review of MARTA's cost allocation methodology and processes as it relates to the More MARTA Enhanced Transit Service. MARTA's role in this review was limited strictly to ensuring that KPMG had complete and unfettered access to all of MARTA's data and records, and as KPMG auditors deemed necessary. And we also wanted to ensure that they had access to all MARTA personnel, making sure that we were available to KPMG for interviews, workshops, question and answer sessions. We have reviewed the recommendations made by KPMG and we concur with them. More importantly, KPMG is here today to present a summary of their review. So we have Ms. Julie Barrientos and Ms. Victoria Fenley of KPMG, and I would ask them to take the mic.
And you're welcome to come to the table if you'd like to, if that's more comfortable.
I think we're okay.
Okay.
We can do that. Thank you, though. Thank you, Collie. And thank you, everyone, for having us. We were very honored to be selected to help you through this process. My name is Julie Barrientos. I am a managing director at KPMG. I've been with the firm since 1995, and I've played many roles. Actually, I have devoted my entire career to the government sector, in the government industry. I started not at KPMG, but actually at the state of Nebraska as an internal auditor. Moved into KPMG to help them grow their government audit practice. Moved out to Chicago and audited several large transit authorities in the Chicago area. And then moved over into our advisory practice, where again I focus solely on government clients, and I do a lot of advisory work for transportation authorities across the nation. So super excited to be here. I work in our finance transformation department, where I help a lot of finance organizations optimize their processes. So that's what I kind of did when I moved out of audit. But I still have a lot of roots in audit. I'm a certified public accountant. So anyway, super happy to be here. I'm accompanied by Victoria, and she will actually introduce herself when she gets to her section. She's going to walk through the recommendations, our observations and recommendations. And just wanted to talk a little bit about KPMG as a firm. KPMG is one of the big four firms in the United States. We are a global firm, but we operate in the United States in 90 different offices across the United States, including Atlanta. I just walked from our Atlanta office a few blocks over. So, and KPMG was actually one of the very first large accounting firms to align themselves by industry. And so that moves into our government practice. We specifically have a lot of individuals that have that work in our government practice. We've been in existence over 100 years. We have more than 1,700 professionals in our office. or in our government practice, where we do a lot of the work with governments across the United States. Same with the transit. We have done work for 9 out of the 10 largest transit organizations in the United States, including MARTA. Moving on, talking a little bit about our project, and this was mentioned earlier, but this is an assessment, not an audit. And the reason it's not technically an audit is because there's no real standard to measure a cost allocation methodology to. It's really a methodology. So when you think about an audit, you think about a financial statement audit where you're auditing to some kind of standards for generally accepted accounting principles or international reporting standards. That's not what the cost allocation methodology doesn't have that type of sort of a standard. But, and so what we did was we looked at 2 methodologies, and Victoria will get into these a little bit more in detail, but we looked at 2 methodologies. We looked at the threshold methodology and the proportional methodology. And we took a look at the base for those allocated costs and how they were being sort of allocated across the MARTA program from an operational standpoint, and came up with some recommendations, and we looked at that against leading practices in the industry.
So Julie, could you just give us a base definition maybe of these 2 methodologies?
Sure. The threshold methodology that was used, it really boils down to enhanced bus service, how you sort of define enhanced bus service. And under the threshold methodology, the enhanced bus service under the MARTA program was any routes that had been established or taken away since 2017, December of 2017. Under the proportional method, enhanced bus service was defined as any routes that after the MARTA routes were stabilized in 2019, it stops there, and it does not change the enhanced bus service or the route definition at that point, and the costs get allocated system-wide based on when the MARTA routes were stabilized in December of 2019. And again, like Victoria will get more into that because it really matters. It really impacts how the costs are allocated across the program and the other bus service. And so it caused a lot of differences in the dollars. But going back to how we approached the project, we did a series of interviews and workshops with our MARTA folks here that were our project sponsors. We recalculated both methods. We read documentation around it. We read the IGA. We read other documentation of how the cost allocation methodology was working, and we conducted our evaluation in that manner. We were given free access to information. The MARTA folks were super helpful. Sometimes these cost allocation methodologies get a little bit hard to sort of pull yourself out and understand, and they really helped us get to that granular knowledge to where we could conduct our assessment effectively. And our deliverables were our current state assessment report, which you guys have seen, and also this executive level presentation and a roadmap for some of the observations that we came up with to how to implement those. So with that, I think I'm turning it over to my colleague, and Victoria will get into the observations and recommendations.
Hi, everyone. I'll just give a quick introduction. My name is Victoria Fenley. I've been at KPMG for the past 8 years. I'm a director in our finance transformation practice. I focus only on government clients, doing similar projects to what we worked with MARTA on. Prior to KPMG, I was in the private sector as a financial planning analysis manager, doing things like cost allocation, and I started my career at New York State Division of Budget, in government as well. So I have the government and private sector financial planning background. So just to get into the observations and recommendations that we developed through our MARTA project. Because MARTA doesn't track bus routes, they don't track actual costs by bus route, you have to develop a cost allocation methodology in order to determine, how much are we spending in operations and maintenance to spread to more MARTA versus the other non-more MARTA routes. And so that's basically why they're developing these cost allocation methodologies to begin with. And so like Julie said, MARTA has developed two different cost methodologies. The threshold method was the original methodology, and then there's also a newly proposed proportional methodology.
And these
so-
are both accepted methodologies
Right, yeah.
industry-wide.
Yes. And so we looked at the pros and cons to both of them. And so the threshold method basically defines bus service enhancements as anything that was an increase or decrease after December 2016. So from 2017 going forward, all service enhancement increases or decreases were attributed to the More MARTA program. And so that, could have been a sound methodology in the beginning stages of the More MARTA program when everything above 2017 was likely attributed to the More MARTA program. There might have been some things that were outside of More MARTA, but it was a ramp-up period where there was a lot of changes going on. Where this became an issue was during the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was, decreases in service that were attributed to More MARTA, but they were really, across the system. And so, at the beginning where they were attributing all increases to More MARTA, they were also taking all decreases from the More MARTA program. And that really ended up being a flawed methodology because, you can only have no service or positive service. You really don't have negative service. And so it was ending up with, negatives. And so, it really ended up, not being, I think, the right methodology for MARTA to be using. It does end up being flawed when you're trying to decrease services. It's a bus system, and so you really have to look at increases and decreases across the system to be able to see, how to adjust those service adjustments. And so the proportional method that we looked at, what it does is it looks at the increases and decreases that occurred between 2017 and 2019, which factors in MARTA ramping up and making different increases and decreases, and then it uses December 2019 as the baseline, which is when the More MARTA program really stabilized. There weren't as many changes in the program. And so this methodology, figures out how much revenue vehicle hours and miles were contributed to specific routes related to the More MARTA program. And then it takes 2019 as the baseline and it applies these fixed percentages that were related to specific routes in the More MARTA program. And that's how it's allocating future costs based on these fixed percentages. And from our perspective, that is a better, I left out, it also spreads any increases and decreases across the system. So if there's an increase or decrease, it doesn't take it from More MARTA first. It spreads those percentages across the system. And so from our perspective, that is a better methodology because it's not realistic, like I said, that all of the increases or decreases are related to More MARTA. There's increases or decreases that happen for the non-More MARTA routes as well. And so this methodology is taking that into account, that this is a system. We're sharing resources. There's not, strict boundaries to the bus routes all the time. It's an interconnected system. And so this methodology is factoring that in rather than looking at, okay, this increase is only to More MARTA, this decrease is only to More MARTA. And so, the results you get do depend on the cost allocation methodology that you use. And so when we calculated the threshold method, it did say that there was about $82 million owed to the capital reserve fund. But when you use the proportional method, which is spreading the cost throughout the system, it's down to $865,000 owed to the capital reserve fund. So, it does depend on the method that you use to get to the different results. And so I think that's why, you might see different numbers depending on which allocation methodology you're utilizing.
So that would mean the $865,000 would be owed from who to who?
Yeah, well, it's basically from operating funds to capital funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that. I think we have some questions. Is
Thank
that
you,
you?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
You're choosing the 865,000 fund, and I'm looking at the 82 million. There's quite a discrepancy in there. Tell me a little bit about how we come up with such totally different numbers.
Well, it's because of what I said.
Put it in plain English for me.
It's hard, but it really is. If you look at there is the back of the report, and if you look at the difference,
And
in
they
the
don't.
costs
They
that
don't
are-
have the report.
Oh,
They
you don't
only
have the
have the
report. Okay.
handout. They only have the presentation.
Okay, I'm sorry, but but where it really comes into play is if you use the threshold method, you look at the first 3 years, and they're exactly the same. The two methods are exactly the same. Where they start breaking off in the later years is because of the downturn in the service. The threshold method takes all of that downturn and pushes it to the MARTOC program, which results in less costs being allocated to the MARTOC program. Whereas if you look at the proportional method in those last years, you'll see the difference of where it's actually taking the full equitable share of the costs and allocating it to across the routes. So that's where you see the difference in the two methodologies, and what sort of turned the light on is the flaw, how the threshold method was flawed, because it was applying all service reductions to the MARTOC program, which wasn't true because all of the routes experienced service reductions. It was just a little, and so when you get to that point, you can see how there's such a big discrepancy in the numbers.
Yes. Senator.
Thank you for your report. I'm Randall Mangum. I am new to the Senate, and I am new to this conversation, and I'm going to ask you to make it third grade for me, because initially you said that the city of Atlanta had some concerns about overpaying, and then my distinguished colleague indicated he asked for clarity, and then you started talking about two different. You talked about whether or not it's allocated to capital reserve fund, whether or not it was a capital fund or operating. But what does that have to do with Atlanta asking for money, being overpaid, and try to get me caught up with this conversation? And no matter what we do today, let it be known, I want to know about what is the future of transit, because I am tired of riding an hour to go 22 miles. And I don't hear anyone talking in this whole capital about transit. We're just spending more and more time in traffic. So that's my second part, but I want to get the first part first. Thank you, madam.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, the one thing I'll explain about operating versus capital is this program is funded with a half penny of sales tax, and so that sales tax is taken, and 50% is dedicated for operational costs, and 50% is dedicated for projects that the City of Atlanta, capital projects that the City of Atlanta had requested, and that's what's in the intergovernmental agreement. So when it's talked about money owed, it's basically, money available for those capital projects, what's spent on operations, what's spent on capital. So when we tell you this 865K number versus the 82 million, it's basically MARTA owing the capital reserve, which is technically the City of Atlanta capital projects. So that's where we're using those fund names, but it's basically MARTA and the City of Atlanta, deciding upon what is dedicated for operations versus capital. Does that make sense?
A little better.
Okay.
My name is Greg Patterson, Deputy CFO with MARTA. I just wanted to add a little bit to that, please. So with the threshold method versus the proportional share method, in the case of during the pandemic when we had the essential service plan put in and all routes reduced in service, all the more MARTA routes, for the most part, had existing core penny service that was providing miles and hours to it, and then the more MARTA enhanced service added miles and hours to that. So when we were reducing service, we were treating it as one whole route. If you do it proportional, you say if you have a 10% reduction, that 10% reduction is applied to the core penny and the more MARTA. On the threshold, all of the reduction was happening to the more MARTA. Does that make sense? I'll try again.
A little. I guess what I'm understanding, to repeat what you just said, because the city of Atlanta has some dedicated funds under the capital fund, you were basically counting all the money one way as far as operating, which was eating up some of their capital money, and that's why they thought that they were owed money because it was not allocated to capital. Is that a fair statement?
I think the question was whether they felt that they got their money's worth of the enhanced bus service, and if we should have instead put more in the capital reserve instead.
Right. Okay, that's good. And
And so just a couple minutes on transit in general. So thank you, Greg, and thank you, KPMG, for the explanation in terms of threshold versus proportional method. You know, I would say that after review of what they have done, the MARTA staff completely concur that it's the proportional method that is far more equitable, far more accurate, and far more appropriate to spend to account for credit, especially in terms of what Greg was talking about, in terms of credit for service not rendered. So that service not rendered was not just inside the city of Atlanta. The threshold method assumes that service not rendered through COVID, through cancellations, through reduced service was felt all over the jurisdiction. So in order to be fair to the other jurisdictional partners, the proportional method takes all of that into account. Transit in general, I mean, it's going to take more time than a minute, but I'm happy to say to you that we've done a lot in the last couple of years and a lot more on the near horizon in terms of the next 2 years to effectuate a sea change in terms of how you will receive transit, what you will see with transit. It goes from station renovations, $1 billion in renovating all 38 stations. It goes to bus rapid transit routes. We have several bus rapid transit routes in the pipeline right now, including Summerhill, which is currently under construction, a couple more in the CIG federal grant program. It goes to a complete rework of the bus network. So the bus network redesign, this will be the first time in 40 years that we've rethought and reimagined the bus network. We've been in community conversation and stakeholder conversation for about 2 years, and it is our intention to roll it out this year. So it for example, increases access to the amount of frequent service, which is 15 minutes or less that you're waiting for a bus. It increases access to that to 245% more people. That's just one of the benefits. There's so many, and each one of these has been the subject of lots of community engagement. It goes on to new trains. We launched the first one on the 30th of January for review, and then we'll start to bring them out in revenue service beginning the end of this year. This is the most advanced train in North America, and it's right here in Atlanta. It goes on to Airport Station, which is undergoing renovation right now and will be ready by the time the World Cup comes around. It goes to Five Points, which is already under renovation downstairs in terms of all the cladding, the wall cladding, the flooring, the ceiling. The lighting. It goes to handheld devices. The way you pay to get into the MARTA system is completely changed now. With AFC 2.0, by next year, you can use your watch, your credit card, your phone. It's no longer are you relying on a Breeze card and reloading. The entire value proposition of MARTA is changing to something that is far more modern, far more future-facing, and deserving of the title that we were given for 24-25, named as the Transit Agency of the Year across North America. So a lot of work happening, and we can get into a lot more detail with you at your leisure.
Madam Chair, one follow-up.
Of course, of course.
Well, because I represent people that are asking me about whether transit is going to come down the I-20 East Corridor, I must ask you that because they asked me that. So speak to that. I know that's a very politically, that's a landmine almost.
Yeah.
But would you just go ahead and speak to that, because there are people that are concerned that they've been paying in DeKalb County, for example, and they don't feel like they're getting their money's worth, just as Atlanta is saying they don't feel they're getting their money's worth.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying and KPMG references, transit is it's a holistic system. So improvements in transit in one area is absolutely an improvement in transit for all. If you can access MARTA anywhere on the system, you now have access to anything that we're doing. In terms specifically of the corridors that we're developing, it is a competitive process, and it's a lengthy process. So we start with locally preferred alternatives, shaping the environmental processes, shaping the origins and destinations that the communities want to see, and then it goes into a competitive process so that we are now competing against other projects across the country for funding. The majority of these projects are funded with federal dollars, and so we have to be, it's about how dense the corridor is, what the opportunity for ridership growth is, the purposes that it serves, and as we speak, the criteria are shifting in terms of what the federal government considers to be points, if you will, towards their level of funding. So every one of our projects goes through this community consideration process, and we shape it down to a locally preferred alternative and then go from there. So in terms of DeKalb, there are a couple of BRT corridors that, locally preferred alternative has been BRT, but we're continuing to discuss with the folks in DeKalb in terms of what it is they want to see and how competitive it is.
DeKalb and Gwinnett. I'm sorry that I left Gwinnett out, but I hear it there also.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Greenwood, in terms of where you are with the City of Atlanta, I understand that some payments have been made to the city?
That is correct. Early days, as recently as January of this year, we made 2 payments amounting to close to $20 million. One was, and I can get Greg to speak to the details if anyone wants those details, but one is really about the methodology that was used, and one was really in good faith. Because Malden and Jenkins came out with this big number, we wanted to proactively assure the City of Atlanta that if that is the confirmed methodology, we have every intention to, and pay is not the word, it's transfer from, what I used pay, I should have said transferred from the core penny fund over to the More MARTA City of Atlanta fund. All the money is accounted for, it's all there, it's just one pocket versus the next. But you're right, about $20 million has already been transferred over to the More MARTA City of Atlanta, which would have to be properly done, would be reconciled. Now we do have a fiduciary responsibility to all of our counties, so Clayton County, DeKalb, and Fulton, and City of Atlanta, and so we have to make sure that the monies properly reflect the services rendered to each of these counties. That said, we do have, we've notified our board, and I've notified the mayor's office of the results of this report. We do have a board meeting on Thursday where we plan to engage in conversations with them about the most judicious way forward in reconciling these numbers.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Greenwood, when I look at your, I'm looking at a table 2 inside this report. It's talking about the amount of sales tax revenue received. And in 2017, you were in the $15-16 million range. The rest of those, you're averaging somewhere in the $70 million range. How many months were you collecting money in 2017?
Do you know that, Kevin? 3 months.
Just 3 months there. And because you made a $20 million payment to the City of Atlanta, I'm assuming that we're not talking about the $865,000 amount that you're owing, but you owe them $800 million?
No. So,
City of Atlanta.
Yeah, so the City of Atlanta, sorry, I shouldn't say that. The Malden and Jenkins report led folks in the City of Atlanta to surmise, Malden and Jenkins never actually said that, but the folks in the City of Atlanta, some folks, surmised that we would then owe them some $865,000. Did I get that number wrong? 75 million, thank you. $75 million. What KPMG has done is said, not taking into account what we've already paid them, they said right from the beginning, properly done, what you should have transferred over to them is $865,000. So I believe where you're headed is, yeah, there is a net reconciliation if we're to be true to this methodology, that we would reconcile the $865,000 from the $75 million.
But you paid them
I
how
keep
much?
getting that number. The 20.
The 20
What,
million.
you know what? What I should do is have the deputy CFO come up here and walk you through these numbers. What, just
If you can put it
restate
in
that
plain
for me,
English,
Craig.
that'd help me.
Did it? Well, good. I'm glad. I'm listening.
Any other questions on that topic then?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this reconciliation that KPMG did, they looked at the start of service in 2017 all the way through 2022, where MARTA originally did our reconciliation, and then they performed their calculations on that same reconciliation, looking at the proportional and the threshold models. So it's as if we never transferred anything to them. What should we have transferred to them, or to the capital reserve? And so this is saying that under the proportional share model that we should have transferred over 865,630. What we did transfer over was closer to the 20 million.
How do you miss something that bad?
Overpaid.
Well, again, going back to the fact that there's two different methodologies on how to approach it. One basically credits the city's service completely for any of the reduction in service. The other one credits the city proportionally to what percentage of that route was funded by the city. And so if you have the route being, let's say, for example, 10% funded by the city, then they would be entitled to 10% of the reduction by a proportional share. Threshold basically gave them 100% until their share was down to zero. Yeah, I'll mention that, as Mr. Greenwood stated, that we questioned the threshold after the period of ramp up and said that probably isn't the best way to go, that there should be a proportional model. That simply wasn't resolved and reconciled during the discussions with Malden and Jenkins, because they went with the initial the initial threshold model that we had come up with. And that was used to calculate what do you charge for ramping up this new service.
I'll have to look at your figures a little more to make it make sense for me.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions for the committee? No. Any more comments?
We just had a couple of more recommendations that I can
Sure.
fly through. But these are more like process improvement recommendations, but we did look at the intergovernmental agreement with the City of Atlanta, and we had some recommendations for that because it is very high level and overarching. I mean, it does list the capital projects, but it doesn't really give like a way to manage the program and communicate between MARTA and the City of Atlanta specifically. And so our recommendations are that the agreement should be updated to provide specifics as to how the funding should be allocated between operations and capital. And then we also thought that there were times when there were service changes that were communicated informally, and so part of the issue is that they're undocumented, and so MARTA might have increased service on a route, but when you go back and try to figure out what happened, there's no documentation. So we're recommending to update the agreement to have a formal process that, when there are service changes made, that it's documented, you put who approved it, the date and the time, and, keep the documentation on that, just so, if there's ever anything that's called into question, you guys have documentation on, this is why we made the changes that we made in the cost allocation methodology. And then the last one is that the agreement should be updated to have, an established reporting cadence between MARTA and the City of Atlanta, so that, the City of Atlanta understands, this is the reports we're going to get on this program's performance. And we're going to get it monthly or quarterly or whatever is agreed to. So we do think that agreement right now, could be a little sharper in terms of the reporting and management that it sets between MARTA and the City of Atlanta. Is there any questions on that one?
No.
Okay. And then these last ones, streamline and automate cost allocation process. We were just discussing with MARTA. They have different departments calculating things in different spreadsheets. So we're just, recommending that there be one integrated workbook or the use of a software tool where possible. But, just having everything in one document and having the tabs all have formulas linked and just be very streamlined, this really helps during the audit process. To have one Excel workbook that can easily tie through a calculation. So that's our just process improvement for the cost allocation calculation specifically. Is there any questions on that one? The next one is to validate the cost allocation assumptions. So the cost allocation calculations do have certain assumptions, like they use planned hours and miles, and there's also some sustaining capital averages, and we're just recommending that MARTA from time to time look at actuals and kind of compare, okay, is what we consumed or assumed actually what happened, just checking whatever assumptions you're making to actual data periodically to make sure that you don't need major updates within your methodology. Any questions on that one? And then once a cost allocation method is established, we're recommending that MARTA just document their whole process in policies and procedures. And this includes, the activities that are needed to conduct the calculation, and then the roles and responsibilities of who is conducting the calculations, what processes do they go through, so that, for cross-training purposes or turnover, you have the whole process documented so that, going forward, you can easily, keep this cost allocation method going even if people leave, or there's a transfer of duties. Any questions on that one? And then the last one is the city does have advanced technology for route-specific tracking, but it's not really used in terms of like at the bus route level. And so this is kind of a long-term, like, nice to have, but, we were recommending that you evaluate using that technology to track more MARTA-specific routes separately. If you did that, you might not need a cost allocation methodology because the technology could actually, track the routes, but, this is more of like a nice to have, and, everything is moving more technology-based, so that's one that's more, like I said, long-term, but a recommendation that we, wanted to put forth. So that's the extent of our recommendations. Any final questions for us?
Chairman, I'm going to just be frank, because that's what my mom called me. I'm really disappointed that our committee members haven't seen this report, haven't seen any of the information until today's meeting. We didn't have any advance notice of this. And for me, I'm going to suggest that we don't take any action on the information that we've been presented, because it's like drinking from a fire hose, trying to look at what you've got. I'm sure we're going to have follow-up questions from our committee members. And for me, I think it's one of those things that we need to make sure that, we all have a good understanding of what you're trying to do. When MARTA gave $20 million back, when you're telling me that on one hand you should have only given 865, that's a pretty big problem.
Thank you. And just to drive that home, it's a question of two methodologies. When the first methodology was rolled out, MARTA said that's not the right methodology. So we said that right from the start. We didn't engage in the nitty-gritty. We just waited until we knew another audit had been kicked off. So we'll just wait until that comes out. We agree with the second methodology. So it's not, in my mind, it's not a difference between the results of the first one and the results of the second one. We never agreed on the first methodology. It was flawed from the beginning. So please do take your time with that report. I mean, it was just finalized yesterday, so we're just bringing it to you for your information, not asking you to do anything with it. But now that it's available, we wanted to start here because it was MARTOC that commissioned the review in the first place.
And I understand you said Malden and Jenkins, they came up with the first methodology?
Yeah, they used the first methodology, the threshold model.
Are they not competent? Are they here?
I don't believe they're here. I would never say that an accounting firm is not competent, but I did say right from the beginning that the methodology that they used was ill-informed.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? And yes, I'm sorry that we didn't have this available in advance. It wasn't possible. So, thank you so much. Meeting's adjourned.
Try to get this. Got your mic.
Yeah.